So I've decided to do something pretty stupid, I think. Reacting to a BrightSide Titanic video, so historic travels hopefully doesn't have to.
The lookout shouts, "Iceberg right ahead!"
I'm not an idiot. That did not look like a White Star ship. At least I don't think I'm an idiot.
The Titanic strikes the ice. Water
Yes.
starts flooding in.
What the hell is that? What is that from? Is that from Poseidon? Poseidon Adventure or something like that?
Third-class passengers are locked
What
up.
the heck is that?
There aren't enough.
They won't lock up. I'm
Lifeboats
already
for
annoyed.
everyone. Panic sets in.
Later.
Violins are playing. The ship sinks. Well, we all know the story of the movie Titanic like the back of our hand by now.
That uncanny AI that's supposed to be James Cameron, that's supposed to be Titanic, there's suddenly a fifth funnel.
But what if I told you that Hollywood lied to us?
Why?
To tell the real story of what happened that freezing
Technically the movie was an adaptation of the story, as accurate as he and his crew knew at the time.
night in
I'm already
1912.
very annoyed.
We need to rewind a bit. The lookout shouts, "Iceberg right ahead!"
Look out, there's an iceberg in the friggin' sky! Frederick Fleet rang the bridge.
Yep, that
Murdoch,
part was true.
supposedly.
Just before 11:40 at night, Frederick
Yep.
Fleet noticed something
That's a photo of
darker
him,
than the
yes.
sea directly ahead. As the ship got closer, he realized it was an iceberg. The engine
From what I understand, it was described that he just saw like what appeared to be a black silhouette on the horizon. Because there was no moon, no light hitting it. What you have to look out for is that black silhouette on the horizon against the stars. And once he saw that, he knew it. Obviously, process of elimination. If it was a boat, there would be lights. There were no lights, so it had to be ice.
engines were quickly reversed and the ship turned sharply. Instead of
Yes.
hitting it head-on, Titanic scraped along the side of the berg,
Yes.
sprinkling ice on the forward deck.
Yes.
If you remember, in the movie, Jack and Rose are having a romantic moment when they feel the ship shudder after hitting the iceberg.
Yeah, that AI is very uncanny and I do not like it. But yeah, it's like depending where you were, it would have felt like a slight bump or a few slight bumps. Or you didn't feel it at all. Depends where you were in the vicinity of the collision.
Everything shakes as if they were in the middle of an earthquake. Some real-life passengers
That's also AI, and that looks nothing like a White Star ship to my knowledge. And it wouldn't have felt like an earthquake.
reported feeling something similar after the impact. But according to Titanic survivor Frank Prentice,
No idea
it
who that
wasn't
is.
exactly like that. He said there was no impact as such, and it all felt more like slamming on your car brakes.
I don't know if this is true. I'm not an expert, but pretty sure not many people like cars, and brakes were not that good by 1912. So I have no idea where that comes from.
Ship stopped, and that was that. Some people even slept right through the collision,
Yeah, it was
confirming that
very
there
slight.
wasn't such an abrupt impact.
Yes,
Mr. Prentice, curious about what had happened, left his cabin and went out to the deck.
that looks like the
When he got
start of
there,
a yacht.
all he could see was a little ice on the surface, not the towering iceberg that...
No, I think because by the time he got on deck, the ice would have been far away and you wouldn't see it. And instead of sailing into an ice field, which they probably wouldn't have realised, particularly those who perished, until morning, he probably just saw ice on the horizon. Just smaller ice. The berg they hit, he probably never saw.
Jack
Again, that's also assuming this is true.
and Rose saw. But
Jack and
as
Rose
we
were
all
false.
know by now, the real damage happened below the waterline,
Yes.
where the iceberg had a jagged spur that slashed a 300-foot gash in Titanic.
The gash is a myth. Again, I can imagine it would have appeared like a gash from those who saw the water pouring in, but we now know there's just small openings in the hull, just enough to let water in, and this is my understanding, just the water pressure would have forced the water in from the external pressure from the ocean outside through those openings. Water would have sprayed in and it would have appeared like a gash, I can imagine.
Titanic's hull. Once the crew realized how
Okay, now I see it's
severe the
AI.
damage was, they immediately began sending distress calls to nearby ships, asking for help.
They did send out the distress calls once they realised how serious the damage was, but that wasn't until approximately an hour post-collision. Because they knew they were taking on water, they didn't know they were sinking until particularly Andrews, did the maths.
At some point in the movie, the radio
Rest in peace, Bernard Fox, the actor who portrayed Captain Smith in Cameron's movie, passed away recently. May he rest in peace.
Operator goes to the captain and says there is only one ship nearby, the RMS Carpathia.
That's one of the closest ships that responded. Mount Temple, I believe, was close, but on the opposite side of the ice. So even if they did get the message, I don't know if they did. It's not likely that would have came any faster because they would have to dodge ice. And again, Californian, which was approximately 9 to 10 miles away, it's hard to verify, was also surrounded by ice. So based on that, if Mount Temple turned to head towards Titanic's reported position, it's likely they probably would not make it in time just based on the ice. But this is all speculative and all hindsight from what we all know now. But Carpathia was not the only ship,
which later ends up rescuing many passengers. But in real life, there were more ships around.
California.
It's believed that
the Burma, I don't know of the Burma, the Frankfurt was German. There was a language barrier, so they would have just been told to shoot through and use Aussie terms for go away.
SS Californian was only about 23 miles away. This ship...
I heard estimates as close as 9, but this is based on testimony, I believe it was Ava Hart. I could be mistaken, who described she saw it and she saw what appeared to be a ship approximately 9 to 10 miles away. But this obviously could be a completely unknown ship, could have been a illegal trawler, could have been anything else. But she claimed she saw a ship and it was frighteningly close.
Ship might have actually seen the Titanic sinking, or at the very least, seen its rockets exploding high in the sky.
Testimony from on board Californian does describe seeing the rockets, so they were within vicinity. The radio was off. Again, this is all in hindsight. If I saw that, I'm going to turn the radio on and make sure what's going on.
Yet, for reasons we will never fully understand, they didn't try to help.
Also, had they responded, this is a bit of a tangent, but had they responded, they were still surrounded by ice, so it's not likely they would respond very quickly. Because again, no moon, very limited light, you're surrounded by ice as far as you can tell. It's not likely they would have gone very far. Again, this is all hindsight, but it was a tragedy.
Let's get back to the story. Now, people need to get off the ship. At 12:45, lifeboat number 7 was the first to be lowered, just like in the movie. Women and children were told to go first.
What the heck is this AI shit?
Some women were hesitant and even refused to get into the lifeboat.
Because this was early on. They didn't want to spread panic. And no one could fathom the ship was sinking. Taking on water, maybe. Sinking, no. Because, like the movie, because they keep going about the movie as if it's 100% accurate. That's something I've always noticed with BrightSide, even with historic channels reviews. Howdy, if you ever catch this. Sam, forgot your name for a second. But no, people would have been hesitant because they still would have felt the ship was safe. Small little boats, some 5 decks into the black, cold ocean. Yeah, I'd be hesitant too. And obviously the women and children first, that depended on what side you were. If you're on the port side would be the left-hand side. Light let women and children in only, no men. On the starboard side, the right-hand side, Murdoch let in women and children were meant to fill in the remaining seats. My understanding is that was their interpretation of the order from Smith. But yeah, early on people would have been hesitant, so I don't blame them. Hence why those early boats were launched about half full or so. Because you also need to take in consideration they didn't know how much time they had, and they probably realised we don't have a lot of time to muck around to fill these boats.
Mr. Prentice said this
I have
happened
no idea
mainly
who this is,
for
and
two
that's
reasons.
an AI image.
First, these lifeboats were high, and passengers were terrified of the...
Actually, I'm actually impressed, because this is based on a photograph from Father Brown, I believe his name is, one of the last known photographs of Captain Smith before the sinking. So that will be the forward cutter, one of them, I believe. So this would have been maybe off Ireland, I'm not sure, because Father Brown departed at Ireland before the ship headed out into the Atlantic and ultimately sank. Hence why we have his photographs, otherwise they would have been lost. But I think that's just a fantastic little detail.
70-foot drop from the deck to the ocean below.
About 70 feet.
And second, most women didn't believe the Titanic would actually sink.
Yeah,
it was called unsinkable after all.
Again with the unsinkable, she was advertised as practically unsinkable. As unsinkable as they could possibly have built her to their respective knowledge of shipbuilding. And this AI footage, I love how calmly they're walking in the flooding room here, which I think is supposed to be a first class area. That water would have been about -2 degrees Celsius, about 28 Fahrenheit, I don't know. I don't know Fahrenheit, I'm Australian. And I don't know, just the AI.
So the idea of getting into a lifeboat seemed pointless at the time.
Yeah, I can
This
agree.
mindset probably explains why Eloise Smith, a first-class passenger, recalled that there was no panic or...
Sorry, I don't know of Eloise. I'm not saying it's false, I just don't know of her. I'm not an expert.
chaos at first. Other survivors backed this up, saying that no women or kids were crying. But
Would have been calm at first, but again, the crew have also been very calmly trying to get people in the boats, particularly at first class, the elites. You don't want to disrespect them, because once they get to shore, you don't want to give you and your company White Star a bad name, saying that your crew was abusive to these people.
But one thing that was indeed concerning, at least for the crew, was the possibility that the lifeboats might buckle under too much weight.
Yeah, that was also mentioned in the film, but I can also understand it. Because, like in the Cameron film, they used replica boats and davits. You could see how much the davits flapped as it was lowering. You can understand all that bouncing on the boat. When you can see if you feel it, you can understand the idea of it buckling and failing, because it's wood. So yeah, I can understand that mindset. But this, again, is all hindsight.
This is one of the theories why the first few lifeboats left carrying only a fraction of their full capacity.
And again, I also think it's just the fact that we don't know how much time we have left. Not a lot. You knew you had at least an hour, 2 at the most. By the time the first boats are lowered away, probably about an hour, hour and a half. You don't have a lot of time to muck around. So it's probably a case of, let's not just wait. We need to get these boats away, especially satellite ones, because ultimately they ran out of time. The last 2 boats floated away as the ship sank out in front of them. They ran out of time. They did not have a lot of time. So understandably, I can imagine it was a case of, we need to get these away. We don't have a lot of time to muck around. We need to fill these boats as quick as we can with as many as people, obviously early on, who are willing to get in, get them away, and then get on to the next one, load that, and so forth, so forth. Because they did not realise how much time they would have. They weren't entirely sure, and it wasn't a lot.
Like lifeboat number 7, which only
That's one of the collapsibles.
carried 27 people in it, even though it could hold up to 65. In total, Titanic had 20 lifeboats, which could carry about half of the
Approximately 1,200 people.
2,200 people on board that night. But that didn't happen. And now we know the passengers had no idea there weren't enough for everyone.
I think that's supposed to be like a galleon, like an old sailing ship.
As women were calmly getting into the first lifeboats, musicians headed up to the deck. Their only goal was to play and keep the passengers calm. That's a pretty well-known fact. But the real
Except for the moon in the background. Even though this is all AI generated.
story is that some survivors said they never saw or heard the band. no violinists
Well, I guess it can also vary where they were.
whatsoever. It's not like Hollywood misled you, though. The musicians did play for over 2 hours after the ship had hit the iceberg.
Because the ship would sink in 2 hours 40 minutes. So early on, especially once the ship stopped before the lifeboats were even set up and being lowered, they probably were just playing, trying to keep the mood soft, calm.
So maybe these passengers were just too panicked to notice the songs, or the musicians started playing later than we think.
Or this is just throwing it out. Maybe they just didn't register. Their brains probably just didn't register because it was close past midnight. They were probably tired. They were cold. They were told you need to get in these boats. I'm just throwing it out. I could be wrong. Now, ancient immigrants, I think this is AI in what looks like, that's supposed to be like the Doña Paz?
Time to talk about the terrible treatment that third-class
I just saw his chin. It was like warped. Hang on. Let's see if I can spot it again. This is like his mouth.
Now, it's time to talk about the terrible treatment that third-class passengers
It's like he had a stroke.
The movie portrayed the crew as cruel, locking the less fortunate below deck like animals, giving them...
I can imagine, I have no way to prove this is just a thought. If it's been betrayed and third-class passengers survived, it's possible some were locked to dissuade them from going back down. And unfortunately, maybe some people got lost on those lower decks and went up to a locked gate. And obviously, they weren't all locked. I have no way to prove this. This is just speculative. But no, they weren't treated like caged animals. There was the door on Scotland Road separating third class to the forward grand staircase. Now I can imagine if that door was unlocked or opened or marked in any way, many more third class potentially could have been saved. Again, this is all speculative because when you actually know the layout of these ships, third class easily would have gotten lost trying to make their way to the top decks to the boats.
Them no chance to reach the lifeboats and save their lives. But the official inquiry into the disaster suggested that wasn't true. I mean, yes, fewer third-class passengers survived compared to those in first and second class, but there were other factors at play. Many third-class passengers were reluctant to leave the ship, clinging to their belongings, and had a harder time making their way up from the cabins.
Second part is true, but hanging on to their belongings, can somewhat understand what they're trying to come across with. So they were immigrants starting a new life, and family belongings, understandable. And yeah, the second part's right, they probably would have gotten lost because the layout of those lower decks are kind of mazes if you didn't know your way around, and considering what nationality they were, there also would have been a language barrier.
Which were at extreme ends of the ship.
This AI. The AI imagery is
Some survivors confirmed that they were not locked up. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Mrs. George Wabi, a Lebanese woman traveling in third class.
Alright, I don't know of this woman. I'm not saying this is wrong, I'm just saying I don't know of her.
Said that when chaos had erupted, some brave crew members and well-dressed first-class passengers had actually helped her get up to the first-class deck and eventually onto a lifeboat. At first,
Again, I'm not claiming that as false or true, I just don't know. But I can also say it's not impossible.
Titanic was sinking slowly, bit by bit. Passengers reported seeing the water rising and hearing pops and cracks. Then there was a loud boom. Some said there had been just one explosion, while others described it as a series of smaller explosions.
My thinking is these sounds would have been popping and snapping of internal structures and rivets and beams and whatnot. Maybe even the stays holding up the funnels as they began to fall. And honestly, the ultimate split. Because once the peak stress was met on the hull, the sounds must have been horrendous. I can only imagine the sounds.
Which they thought had been the bulkheads giving way. And there's also a group of people who said they had only heard a rumbling sound. So not everyone agreed on the sound they had heard.
Yeah, I can understand that. It depends how far away you were.
But one thing is a fact.
Whoops.
By 2:18 in the morning, everyone agreed on the sound they had heard. But one thing is a fact. By 2:18 in the morning, the lights on Titanic went out, and the ship plunged into complete darkness.
Yep.
As the bow continued...
That is a picture rendering of Titanic, but that's an odd angle.
...continued sinking, the stern rose out of the water, putting...
That's roughly where she started to break apart.
...immense pressure on the middle of the ship. This caused the Titanic to break in two.
Bit of a tangent, but my understanding is it would have been a lot of internal failures before the external full break, as described by survivors and obviously what we see on the wreck. Because, again, the sounds that were described, it's like those popping and banging on sounded like explosions, probably would have been internal failures before the whole plates gave way and the whole ship split open.
In James Cameron's movie, this moment is pretty dramatic, with the ship sinking almost straight down into the water. But in...
It is a very spooky shot, and I can only imagine the horror.
reality, the break probably happened at a much lower angle, likely just below the waterline.
Roughly at the waterline, I believe, is most accepted today, but again, the Cameron movie is based on their best understanding at the time. And I also look at it this way, since it's technically been told through survivor testimony, it was also shown prior to her telling the story an animation of what they believed the ship sank like. Maybe this is my head canon, that she was telling her recollection of the sinking based on that animation.
Even so, it tilted enough that people couldn't stay on their feet and started sliding into the water.
I think upwards of about 23 degrees before failure, and yeah, if you had certain shoes, they wouldn't have to tread like today's shoes, so it would have been very easy to slip.
One interesting thing is that it wasn't until the wreckage was found in 1985 that it was finally confirmed the Titanic had broken apart.
Yeah, because inquiries, to my understanding, concluded the ship sank intact based primarily on testimony of the prominent survivors, namely the officers who did not see any, particularly Beitel, I believe. Sorry for that. He didn't describe what appeared to be a breakup, and again, I can imagine all the chaos of him trying to get the collapsible beam in that funnel, narrowly missing him. He probably heard it, but he probably had no idea what was happening. So it was widely accepted she sank intact. All the films leading up to it, such as A Night to Remember, depicted her sinking in one piece, because that was just widely accepted, despite all the testimony saying otherwise. So by 1985, I also feel that when Ballard he and his team, I should say, discovered that boiler before they discovered the main wreck, I think that alone should have been enough to say the ship broke open at some point.
Up until then, survivors had given conflicting stories. At least 8
Oh, what is it? Far From Home? I don't watch those films, but wasn't it that Spider-Man Far From Home or something where that ferry got cut in half?
Survivors claimed they had seen the ship split. Emily Ryerson, a first-class passenger, described it as if the Titanic had been sliced in half with a knife.
Sounds about right. But again, it also depends on where you were and what you saw, depending on where you were.
But there was also a small...
Also, I don't know if that person is real or not. I don't know. I just don't know.
...number of witnesses that insisted Titanic had gone down intact.
Again, I can also understand it, again, based on how close they were, what they could see. It's all varying. I'm not calling them liars. They're just saying what they saw, what they believe they saw. I'm not calling them liars. I'm not saying they're wrong. I can understand respective perspectives from survivors who said it broke and if it didn't.
At the time, this theory was more accepted.
It looks more like a tugboat.
Because most people still didn't believe that the supposedly
That's supposed to be Titanic, but it's done up more like the Queen Mary.
Indestructible ship.
Indestructible, no. I mean, Olympic got collided by a warship, I think it was. Hawk. Some significant damage, which that alone should say that they're not indestructible. As durable as they could build them at the time, but not indestructible.
Could break in half. So why the conflicting reports? Okay, so what you don't see in the movies, for obvious reasons, is how incredibly dark it was when the tragedy happened.
That's actually valid. Once the lights went out, it was black. And unless you could spot that faint outline on the stars of the ship and see what appeared to be an opening in the hull. So again, that's a case of depending on where you were and what you could see once you could make out the outline of the ship.
It was like being in a room with no light, where you can only make out shapes and shadows. That's what it was like on the lifeboats. This means passengers couldn't really see what was happening.
I just noticed it's got an engine.
And most of those who were close to the ship either lost their lives or were too focused on trying to survive to pay attention to the details of the wreck.
Yeah, I agree.
Although James Cameron's film didn't fully capture how terrifyingly dark the disaster truly was,
because it's a film, you need to be able to see it.
The 2012 TV series Titanic did a better job of showing the pitch-black horror of that night. Even then, the reality was much darker and more terrifying than either of these two productions could portray.
Because, again, you need to be able to see it to show it. You can't necessarily make a movie about a black screen. It's not very engaging.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends.
I'm not doing that.
Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.
No. So that wasn't necessarily a painful watch, but that was annoying. Again, I only did this so Historic Travels hopefully doesn't have to, but I wouldn't be angry if he fact-checked me. Anyway, I've been Didgery, and maybe I'll see you next time. We'll see what happens.